Discover the exciting and touching story of Naomi, the precious daughter of Bright and Sandra, a couple who faced years of hardships before finally being blessed with their little princess. But on a fateful day, something unexpected happens and changes everything. Find out what happens when a family's life is turned upside down by a single lapse. Once upon a time, there was a couple named Bright and Sandra. After their wedding, they were not immediately blessed with children. It took 5 years of tears and prayers before they were able to give birth to their daughter Naomi. After Naomi's birth, they never stopped thanking God for granting her to them when all their hopes had been exhausted. On a pleasant evening, after having dinner and retiring to bed, Naomi was lying between the two of them. Mr. Bright was just looking at his little daughter and smiling. "What is making you smile tonight?" Sandra asked her husband, also smiling. "Who could have imagined we would be parents one day?" "I hope you remember everything we went through," Mr. Bright said. "How could I forget? I was called barren. We were ridiculed for 5 long years. I received varied advice from many friends. Older women gave me numerous solutions. Doctors always had something new to suggest each time we visited them. People always pointed at me as I walked by. Even some women in the church mocked me. I was called barren. I almost committed suicide after a woman told me to my face that I was a man and therefore couldn't give children to my husband," Sandra recounted as tears rolled down her cheeks. "It's all right, it's all right. That is in the past. God gave us Naomi and blessed us. She is our joy," Mr. Bright said with a smile. "Her 7th birthday is next week. Our daughter is going to turn 7, Sandra said with a smile. Both kept looking at Naomi, who was sleeping peacefully. Then Mr. Bright reached out and turned off the light, bidding his wife good night. The next day, Mr. Bright was so busy at work that he forgot it was time to pick Naomi up from school. It was the weekend, and Mr. Bright was the one who took Naomi back during the weekends. 40 minutes had passed since school let out, but Mr. Bright still hadn't arrived with Naomi. Sandra decided to wait a bit longer, thinking it was just the traffic. After a few more minutes, she became worried and called her husband. Mr. Bright was shocked to realize that almost an hour had passed since Naomi's school dismissal. He apologized to his wife and asked her to pick Naomi up quickly because he was still very busy. Sandra immediately stopped what she was doing and started heading to Naomi's school. She was already 55 minutes late and took another 15 minutes to reach the school. Sandra got on a bus, and after a 5-minute ride, she got stuck in traffic. The traffic was so bad that Sandra decided it was better to get off and find a motorcycle, as motorcyclists always have a way of maneuvering through traffic. After hurriedly walking for a while, Sandra stopped a motorcycle. She tried to get on the motorcycle but remembered she had forgotten her purse on the bus she had boarded. Sandra didn't know whether to continue towards the school or go back to get her purse. She asked the motorcyclist to leave while she returned to get her phone, which was inside the purse. Sandra started walking back hurriedly, looking for the bus she had boarded. Meanwhile, at the school, Naomi was sitting outside with some of her classmates who were waiting for their parents to come and pick them up. Some who had older siblings went home with them while the parents arrived to pick up their children in large numbers. Naomi just wondered if her father had forgotten her. "Naomi, isn't your dad coming today?" asked one of her classmates as they left with their mother. Naomi was already tired of waiting and was very hungry because she hadn't eaten anything all day, as she didn't like the food her mother had prepared and put in her lunchbox. Naomi stood up and decided to go home alone. She left the school with her backpack and lunchbox. She started walking alone, carrying her lunchbox. After a few minutes of walking, Naomi's lunchbox slipped from her hand and rolled into the main street. She tried to retrieve it, but someone called out to her because a speeding car was coming her way. On impulse, the driver slammed on the brakes, but it was too late, and he hit Naomi. The man immediately got out and saw Naomi barely alive and bleeding. Before people could approach, he put Naomi in his car, reversed, and sped away. While Sandra hurried back to the spot where she had gotten off the bus, she noticed some bus drivers were turning to take another route due to the traffic ahead. She quickened her pace, trying to find the bus she had left, but couldn't identify it. It seemed the bus had turned around with the others. Sandra put her hands on her head in confusion. She had lost her purse containing her phone. She wanted to call her husband but couldn't. She also couldn't afford a motorcycle ride since she had no money. She decided to walk to the school and then call her husband using one of the teacher's phones. When she arrived at the school after many minutes of walking under the scorching sun, Sandra reached the front gate. She was sweating profusely like someone who had run a marathon. The environment was very quiet, unlike the usual time when there were children around. Sandra's only hope was that her daughter was inside the gate, seeing that it wasn't locked. As she reached out to open the gate, she saw the principal coming out with a padlock to close it. "Good afternoon, Ma'am," Sandra greeted, trying to force a smile. "Good afternoon, my dear. Why are you sweating so much?" the principal asked, looking at Sandra. "Sorry, I am so late." "It looks like everyone has already left," Sandra asked, looking around. "Yes, it's already 4 p.m. and everyone has left. Today is Friday, and we close earlier," the principal replied. "And my daughter?" Sandra asked, fixing her gaze on the principal as she locked the gate. "Your daughter? There's no one here. Why don't you call your husband to see if he picked her up?" "He usually picks her up on Fridays," the principal responded. "I know my husband well. He wouldn't ask me to come pick up our daughter if he had already done so," Sandra said, already having mixed feelings. "Why don't you call him?" the principal suggested. "That's the problem, I can't. I was in a hurry and forgot my purse with my phone on the bus I boarded when there was traffic." My phone and the little money I had are gone. I just wanted to come get my daughter before thinking about my phone. So, how did you pay the bus driver when you got off? I had money in my hand and paid like that. Oh, my phone isn't the problem. Where is my daughter? Where is Naomi? Sandra asked, already having a bad feeling. Take my phone and call your husband. Let's see if he picked her up, the principal said, taking the phone out of her bag and handing it to Sandra. She took the phone and immediately called Mr. Bright. He answered right away, and Sandra asked if he had picked up their daughter from school. Mr. Bright said he had been calling her and she wasn't answering. He wanted to know if they were already home. He couldn't understand what he was hearing on the phone, that his princess was missing. He told Sandra he would come there immediately. Mr. Bright ended the call, and Sandra could feel the tears welling up in her eyes. Where is my daughter? Sandra asked the principal with a trembling voice. The principal was perplexed and had no answer to Sandra's question. She calmed Sandra and called the teacher responsible for Naomi's class. She asked the teacher to return to the school as there was a missing child case. Sandra didn't know where to start looking for her only daughter. Tears continued to roll down her cheeks as she waited for the teacher. She was restless and kept looking around, hoping to see Naomi. After a few minutes, the teacher returned to the school. They asked who had taken Naomi. The teacher said that Naomi was sitting with her best friend Anita outside, waiting for her father. She saw Anita's mother come to pick up Anita. After a while, she didn't see Naomi anymore and thought her father had taken her. Sandra asked the teacher to call Anita's mother and ask if Naomi had gone with them. The teacher was looking for Anita's mother's number in her contact list when Mr. Bright got off the motorcycle and approached hastily. A call came to the principal's phone. She answered. Hello, Ma'am. I think one of your students was in an accident a few minutes ago, said the voice on the other end of the phone. The principal stepped away a bit so she wouldn't be overheard and asked what the person looked like. The description matched Naomi. She slowly lowered the phone, not knowing how she would tell the couple that their only daughter had been involved in a serious accident. Moreover, no one knew where she had been taken by the man who hit her. The principal just stood there, looking at Mr. Bright, who was consoling Sandra, who was crying bitterly. It seemed that Anita's mother had just said that Naomi was not with them. A tear almost fell from the principal's cheek out of confusion and pity for the couple. Earlier, when Naomi was hit by a speeding car, the man who hit her immediately got out of the car. He saw Naomi barely alive and, without wasting any time, put Naomi in his car. He reversed and drove away quickly. He was praying that she wouldn't die before he got to the hospital. David was on the phone talking to a business associate. He had come for a visit and was returning to his city. He didn't see Naomi, he was distracted by the call he was making. He only heard a loud scream that caught his attention, but before he could hit the brakes, he had already hit the girl. So, he immediately got out and put Naomi in his car. He didn't want to risk the girl's life. What kind of temptation is this? David asked himself as he drove quickly to a hospital he knew. He was sweating profusely as he drove at maximum speed. When he arrived at the hospital, he carried Naomi inside. She was already bleeding from her mouth and head. It seemed that Naomi's head had hit the iron on the front of the jeep first before hitting the ground. The nurses immediately took over. The doctor was busy with another patient when he was informed of the emergency. He quickly came to see the new patient. David was pacing back and forth in the hospital, not knowing what to do. The doctor was taking a long time in the hospital room, and David was getting more anxious by the moment. He didn't want to hear any bad news. The doctor came out with a sad look. David approached to ask how the girl was. "I'm sorry, sir. The accident was really severe. We examined her carefully and found that she has internal brain bleeding. We tried to control it with some medications and injections. She needs immediate surgery to survive," the doctor said with a concerned tone. "Surgery? Do the surgery, doctor. Money will not be a problem. I will sign any necessary documents. I don't want this girl to die, please, doctor," David pleaded with his hands clasped. "I'm sorry, but we don't have the necessary equipment here. You'll have to take her somewhere else. I'll give you some written notes." David didn't know where he was. He didn't know which hospital had the necessary equipment for the surgery, so he decided to take Naomi to his city. He needed her to get better before looking for her parents. David asked the doctor if he could take Naomi on a 4 to 5 hour trip to another hospital where he came from. The doctor gave his approval, provided some written notes to David, and administered another injection to the girl. Back at Naomi's school, the principal called Mr. Bright softly. "I just received a call. Your daughter Naomi was involved in an accident." "My daughter was involved in an accident? Where? Where did it happen?" Sandra ran and grabbed the principal, asking impatiently. "A few minutes down the street," the principal replied. Sandra immediately ran toward the accident scene without waiting for the others. Mr. Bright quickly followed his wife, running toward the scene of the accident. When they arrived, they were informed that the man who hit her had taken her, possibly to a hospital. Since no one knew which hospital Naomi had been taken to, the teacher, the principal, and the couple took a taxi to the nearest hospital. In the taxi, Mr. Bright wanted to scold the principal, but he knew it was his fault. Sandra held Bright tightly, hoping their daughter would be at the hospital, while tears streamed down her cheeks. Both the teacher and the principal also hoped to find Naomi in good health. When they arrived at the hospital, Sandra was the first to run inside. She asked the nurses if they had seen a girl in a school uniform who had been involved in an accident. The nurses checked, and there was no record of a girl involved in an accident. Sandra was disappointed but still headed to the next hospital. When they arrived at the third hospital and asked about a girl who had been in an accident, they said a girl matching the description had been brought to the hospital. It was a large hospital, so they were asked to wait while they found out which ward the girl was in. Sandra felt relieved to finally see her daughter. She just hoped Naomi was okay. Everyone waited impatiently for someone to take them to see Naomi. Then the doctor came out. He came to see who was looking for the girl. "Doctor, how is my daughter? Where is she? Can I see her?" Sandra asked, crying. "Yes, doctor, please, can we see our daughter?" It was then that the doctor realized the people in front of him were the girl's parents. "I'm sorry, are you the girl's parents?" the doctor asked, looking from Sandra to Mr. Bright. "Yes, we are," they replied anxiously, nodding. "I'm sorry to deliver this sad news. Your daughter was involved in a severe accident that almost took her life. When she was brought here, she was bleeding from her head. I thought that was all until I decided to examine her carefully and discovered that she had internal brain bleeding. My daughter has internal bleeding. Where is she? Where is my daughter? I want to see her, please," Sandra pleaded with tears rolling down her cheeks. The doctor sighed and continued, "She needed surgery to stop the bleeding completely. I administered some medications and injections to stop the blood flow. Our hospital doesn't have the necessary equipment for the surgery, so the man who brought her decided to take her to a big city where she could be treated." "Which city? Which city, doctor? Do you have his number?" Mr. Bright asked urgently. "I don't know the city he's from, nor do I have his number," the doctor said in a disappointed tone. Sandra slowly turned, looked at her husband, and fainted. They tried to revive her immediately in the hospital. When Sandra woke up, all she did was cry bitterly, asking for her only daughter. "Why me? Why Naomi? After 5 years, God. After 5 years, you gave me Naomi. Why this great temptation? Where is my Naomi? Where is my Naomi?" Sandra kept saying through her tears. Mr. Bright tried to keep himself composed. His lovely princess was on the brink of death, and no one knew where she was. He held his wife and tried to console her. Sandra refused to go home. She wanted her daughter brought back to her. The principal and the teacher couldn't go home either. They just looked at the couple in pain and couldn't hold back their own tears. It was getting dark, and they needed to go home. Mr. Bright convinced Sandra to follow him home. The principal asked Mr. Bright not to take out his anger on the school, as they would unite forces to find Naomi. Mr. Bright wasn't in the mood to cause a scene, he just wanted to take his wife home because she wasn't well. Blaming the school wouldn't bring their daughter back. He blamed himself and hoped that the man would bring their daughter back alive. Meanwhile, David was driving quickly. When he was stopped by the police, he showed them the written report from the doctor along with the notes, and they let him pass. He drove for hours and finally reached his city. It was already dark, but he went straight to the hospital. He handed over the notes, and Naomi was quickly taken to the operating room while David made the necessary payments. The surgeon was called. Unfortunately, he was still at the hospital. He had planned to leave, but something kept him there. He immediately went in to see Naomi. David was in the waiting room, praying and hoping that Naomi would come out safe. He kept pacing back and forth and rubbing his hand on his head. His phone kept vibrating in his pocket. He took it out, and it was his wife, Tina, calling. She had called several times, and he hadn't answered. He picked up the call, and his wife asked why he wasn't home yet, after he had said hours ago that he was on his way. David explained everything to his wife. She asked where he was so she could come immediately. After a few minutes, Tina arrived at the hospital. She found her husband where he was sitting and sweating. She asked how everything had happened, and he told her. Tina was worried and decided to wait with her husband for the surgery results. The surgery took a long time. Occasionally, a nurse would come out and then go back into the operating room. David and Tina kept dozing off in the hospital waiting room. They desperately wanted Naomi to be healed. Time seemed to drag on, but finally, the doctor came out. He was smiling. David was the first to see the doctor. He tried to stand up, and Tina, who was sitting next to him, also woke up. "Doctor, how is she? Was the surgery successful?" David asked anxiously. "By the grace of God and not by us, the girl is safe and out of danger." "Yes, the surgery was successful." "Yes, thank God," David said loudly as his wife hugged him happily. "Please, lower your voices," the doctor said in a soft tone. Okay, David said. "She needs a lot of rest. She might lose part of her memory, which will only return with time, by the grace of God. Also, she may not be able to speak well for a while. I gave a list of medications to the nurse. You should get them and ensure she takes them as prescribed. She really needs a lot of love and care from both of you to recover soon." "Can we see her now?" Tina asked softly. "Of course, but don't disturb her. She needs maximum rest," said the doctor and left. The couple thanked the doctor and entered the hospital room immediately. Tina walked in and saw Naomi. Streams of tears ran down her cheeks, and she began to sob bitterly while David tried to console her. The principal left with a heavy heart. She knew Naomi was Mr. Bright's only daughter. She knew how it felt to have a missing child. She blamed the responsible teacher for being so careless. The teacher wanted to defend herself, but she knew that nothing she said would justify the fact that Naomi had disappeared under her watch. She just prayed and hoped that Naomi was safe wherever she was. Mr. Bright hailed a taxi to take them home. He continued consoling Sandra as they drove back home together. When they got home, Mr. Bright started making calls, raising awareness that his daughter was missing. He wanted to go to the police station, but he couldn't leave his wife alone in the condition she was in. Sandra sat in the living room chair, feeling so weak it was as if she had lost a part of herself. She wondered why such a heavy trial had come upon her. She couldn't blame her husband. She knew it wasn't intentional, but she wondered why, of all days, it had to be the same day that traffic delayed her. If there hadn't been traffic, she might have reached the school before Naomi had the accident. Sandra slowly got up and headed towards her room, wiping away her tears. "Where are you going, Sandy?" Mr. Bright asked, looking at his wife. Sandra just shook her head and continued walking towards the room. She entered the room and knelt beside the bed. "Father, I know you won't let anything happen to the only child you gave me. I know you will heal her, even if she is not here with me. Wherever she is, in any hospital, let her be healed, because I trust in you, Lord. In Jesus' name, Amen," Mr. Bright said loudly. Sandra turned and looked at him. He had followed her into the room. Mr. Bright consoled his wife. They had no appetite for food. He took his wife to the bathroom and helped her take a bath. After they finished, they went to bed. Neither Mr. Bright nor Sandra could sleep, with many questions running through their minds. Who had taken Naomi? Why did he leave the city with Naomi without their consent? Was Naomi really safe out there? How would they see their only daughter again? Tina began to sob bitterly upon seeing Naomi's condition. David held his wife and led her out of the room. The doctor had warned them not to disturb Naomi to avoid any complications. Years ago, when David married Tina, she got pregnant for the first time. The couple was so happy with the coming child. A few weeks later, Tina had a miscarriage. She cried because she didn't know what caused the miscarriage. She got pregnant again and this time tried to be careful, avoiding everything the doctor had advised against. Finally, she gave birth to a boy. David and Tina were so happy, they named their son Pascal. After Pascal's birth, the doctor brought the sad news that Tina could no longer conceive due to some complications she had experienced. David and Tina didn't worry much because they had their son and didn't want many children. Pascal grew up to be a very intelligent child, admired by many. He became the pride of his parents. Over time, Pascal fell ill. He was taken to the hospital for treatment and got better. After a few weeks, he got sick again. He was taken to the same hospital and improved. Suddenly, it became a habit for Pascal to fall ill every week. This didn't bother David and Tina much because they had the money to buy medication for their son. Pascal began to lose weight, and his illness became so serious that Tina suggested changing hospitals. David agreed, and Pascal was taken to another hospital. When they arrived at the hospital, a doctor was called due to the severity of Pascal's condition. After many tests, the doctor called the couple into his office, leaving Pascal lying in the hospital bed. The doctor told David and Tina that their son had leukemia, a type of blood cancer. He said leukemia was controllable and treatable in children, but Pascal's case had reached its peak, and he could die at any moment. He advised David and his wife to spend their last moments with their son. Tina cried a lot in the doctor's office, then went with David to see their son. When they arrived, Pascal was just looking at his parents with partially open eyes. The couple tried to hide their tears. Pascal smiled at his mother as he held her tightly. Suddenly, Tina felt Pascal's grip loosen. She looked at her son and realized he had passed away. She shook him vigorously, trying to wake him, but he was truly gone. David stood staring at his son with tears streaming down his cheeks. Tina hugged Pascal, crying bitterly. As Tina looked at Naomi lying there with bandages, she remembered how her son died in a hospital bed while smiling at her. Who knows if she is the only daughter of her parents, like us? How would they cope without their daughter? Tina asked her husband through tears. Tomorrow morning, I will go back and look for her parents using the name on her school uniform, David said, still consoling his wife. The next morning, Mr. Bright woke up. He sat on the bed, thinking about how to find his only daughter. He decided he would go to the police station to file a report about his daughter's disappearance. A call came to his phone. It was the school principal, calling to apologize and assure him that the school would help bring Naomi back. Mr. Bright knew those words only came because she was afraid of losing the school. He just wanted his daughter to be found and nothing more. So, he went to the police station to file the report. The police assured Mr. Bright that they would do their best to bring his daughter back. When Mr. Bright returned from the police station, he wanted to go to work but decided to go back home and stay with his wife. Upon arriving home, he found the door open. He had asked Sandra to lock the door when she left. Mr. Bright slowly opened the door to find out why it was open. At the hospital, David returned to where Naomi was lying with his wife, Tina. She hadn't moved since the surgery was done. She lay there in the white gown that had been changed, and the bandage on her head had a slight blood stain. The couple just sat on an empty bed across from Naomi. "She is so beautiful and adorable," Tina said, hugging her husband as they looked at Naomi. "Yes, she is. Her parents must be lucky to have her." "Thank God the operation was successful," David said with a smile. He looked at the clock, and it was 1:02 a.m. "I think you need to go back home and rest, dear. You have to be at work early, remember," David said to his wife. Tina touched her phone and saw that it was already early morning. She told her husband she wouldn't be able to sleep if she went back home. David tried to convince his wife, but she wanted to stay with him and Naomi. He noticed how Tina looked at Naomi with so much love. Over time, Tina fell asleep on her husband's lap while David leaned against the wall, sitting on the bed. The reflection of the morning sun found its way into the room where David and his wife were. The noise of people moving around inside the hospital woke David and Tina. They were tired. The first thing they did was check on Naomi. She was still sleeping and had not opened her eyes. David left the room and went to call the nurse who was attending to Naomi. He asked for the uniform Naomi was wearing before they changed her clothes. The nurse gave the uniform to David, who went out and placed it perfectly on the back seat of the car. After looking at Naomi for a while, Tina left the room. She was late for work. She left David at the hospital and went home. David tipped the nurse and asked her to take care of Naomi. Then, he left the hospital and headed towards the car. Something surprised David. He had 2 flat tires. He hadn't noticed when he came to drop off Naomi's uniform. He had only 1 spare tire, so he decided to walk down the road to get help. A few minutes later, David returned with someone, and the tires were changed. It was time to return to the city where he had hit Naomi to look for her parents. As David approached the city, something strange happened. He turned to get the uniform he had placed on the back seat of the car, but to his great surprise, the uniform was no longer there. David immediately hit the brakes. He decided to stop the car and look for the uniform. He parked the car and got out. He searched for the uniform but couldn't find it. Who do you think hid Naomi's school uniform? Do you think Tina wants Naomi to return to her biological parents? What do you think Tina's true intentions are? Find out in the next episode. Share this incredible story with your friends and family and help us spread messages of faith, hope, and resilience. Thank you for watching and being part of our community. Together, we will continue to explore tales that touch the heart and inspire change.